Afternoon, good noon. I think we can start now. We have Damaris, who is our sign language interpreter, has joined us. And I think basically I'll start with introducing myself and why we're here and what we look forward to during the webinar. And then I will hand it over to Njahira, who will be our moderator for the day, to actually welcome the panelists to have this conversation. My name is Melody. I work with Initiative for Equality and Non-Discrimination. Basically, what we do advocacy, we do public education, and we actually are a feminist organization. We ground ourselves in feminist principles and care. Today, we are celebrating and observing Human Rights Day. Yeah. And what Human Rights Day is basically is to look at where we've come from, where we're going, and where we are at, and now we uphold this fabric that we see that it is human rights that connects us and makes us all human. And for today, this webinar is really necessary because for the past 2 years, we've seen regression when it comes to human rights. And we all know when there's that regression, marginalized communities, queer folks, feminists, women, and of course, the global south communities are mostly affected. And we form part of that group, most of us, if not all of us. And these conversations are key because one, we've seen how programs have shifted. We've seen how democracies have shifted from our context in Kenya, going to Tanzania, our neighbor, going to Uganda, going even to global, right? And this effect has also kind of brought us into a state where we have to reimagine, we have to restructure, we have to recall ourselves and say, this is how we've been organizing. How do we organize? How do we stand in solidarity in our various organizing, in our various I don't want to call it individuals, but in our various capacities as feminists, organizers, and also as individuals. That's why we're here today. And I wish to introduce Njahira, who will be taking over so that we can have further conversations on how that looks like. And I'm sure that from this webinar, we'll have also action points. We also have best practices. We'll also imagine our present and our future when it comes to democracies that we operate in. Karibuni sana for the webinar, and just to notify you all that this webinar will be recorded for the duration that we're here, and also we have the sign language interpreter in case you need you have an accessibility need. Yes, Njahira, please do take over.
Thank you so much, Melody, and especially thank you to Einand for hosting this wonderful conversation, for giving us this platform where we can listen to our wonderful expert panelists who will provide us with ideas for how we can continue to grow and build in this time of democratic repression. Good afternoon, everyone. As Melody has mentioned, my name is Jahira. I'm Feminist Programs Lead at Feminist in Kenya, and I'll be moderating this conversation. It's going to be an open conversation amongst all the panelists, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to write them down, and then you can ask them at the end of the conversation during the Q&A session. So I'll let my panelists go ahead and introduce themselves. We can start with, who do I see on my screen? Rachel Mikali.
Thank you, Jaira. Thank you, Annette. My name, and happy International Human Rights Day 2025. My name is Rachel Mwikali. I work with a social movement called Coalition for Grassroots Human Rights Defenders Kenya, and also Pussy Power movements. And I sit in the capacity at the moment for those two movements for this conversation, but also in my capacity as a woman human rights defender and a feminist activist.
Thank you, Rachel. Eve?
Happy International Human Rights Day, folks. My name is Eve Odor. I serve as the executive coordinator for GALC Plus, and I am a gender non-conforming feminist and human rights activist who does many, many things. But for the sake of this conversation, I'm thinking all my intersections in my identities come together. So I'm really excited to chat and take this conversation forward.
Sorry, I hear you, Eve, on the various intersections. Vivian, if you could go ahead.
Hi everyone, happy International Human Rights Day, and thank you so much to INED for creating the space for this conversation. My name is Vivian Ouya, and I'm co-founder at Feminist in Kenya, and I'm also a human rights lawyer. And at Feminist in Kenya specifically, we mobilize and activate women in all our diversities to be able to challenge the different systems of oppression that oppress us, but also we organize at the intersections of reclaiming our sexual and reproductive health and rights, digital rights, raising feminist political consciousness as a way of looking at things and as a way of being as well, and ending all forms of violence, including structural and interpersonal violence. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Welcome, Vivian. Erica.
Hello, hi everyone. I am Erica Njuguna, a youth climate justice organizer based in Nairobi, Kenya. I work with Angry Alliance, the Alliance of Non-Governmental Radical Youth, which is an international youth-led climate justice policy collective. And I also work as a movements and engagement lead with the Civil Society Equity Review, which is our movement think tank. And I'm excited to be here with all of you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Oreo.
Hi everyone. I'll be having my video off because of the internet. My name is Oreo, a community organizer from Meru County, Kenya. I organize with the Meru Amazonians. I'll be representing grassroots voices in this conversation and bringing on ideas to see how we can build our solidarity in the new wave of anti-rights and everything we've seen across the media and across the countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. So I'm going to start with Eve. And once again, I encourage all the panelists, if you have anything to chime in with regard to a particular question, feel free to do so, as this is an open conversation. So Eve, the first question that I had for you here is, in times of democratic backsliding, which is what we're going through right now with the budget cuts, increases in fascism, and so on, what strategies are feminist movements successfully using to protect the civic space?
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to go first. I was very prepared for that. I'm joking, but like, yeah, let's go. So what are some of the strategies that feminists are successfully doing? I feel like it is our role and it is our duty, and I can see like feminists have stepped up to hold the line, right? Because when everything is falling apart, when it feels like everybody's suffocating and everybody's like trying to figure out what's happening, feminists are the ones holding the line and making sure that when the dust settles, at least we've not lost everything, right? And we've not lost everyone, and we are not all burnt out and wiped out. So I've noticed that some of the strategies that have been I can call successful myself is knowledge sharing and education, because we can't be the only ones who know things, right? And it is really unfair. Like, we live in a very unjust society and unjust world where it just happens that some people will have more knowledge than others, right? So making sure that we are sharing knowledge and making sure that we are educating ourselves, each other, and also like just general population on why it's important, why the work we do is important, why it's important to hold the line, and making sense of the world, right? Because when everything is happening all at once, sometimes people get confused, which is one of the tactics for our opposers, right, and our oppressors, to create this sort of confusion, and people are just like, what is happening? And you notice like earlier this year when you went on social media, when you're speaking to people, everybody was just like, what the hell is going on? Right? Because everything is happening all at once. And I feel like it is our duty to try and make sense of the world and then share this knowledge with the world. And secondly, I'd say protest, right, which is one of the tools we've always had in our toolkits as feminists. And protest can come in different forms and in different ways, right? We can boycott, we can divest, we can be like all of these things we've been saying, and seeing people finally making sense of it, right? Like the connection between economy, and injustice, and being like, if we stopped buying Brookside, what does that do to the Kenyatta family's income, and what does that mean for the elephants in Kenya, right? Like making the links between all of these conversations that we try to have in our small circles, but then having them now publicly and more openly, and inviting other folks in, right? So we are not constantly just speaking to each other, which we've been accused of a lot of the times, right? Like we keep preaching to the choir, to the converted. So I've seen these efforts of trying to broaden our spaces and broaden these conversations, and having public conversations like these ones, right? Because anyone could join this webinar and learn and educate themselves. So I'm thinking those are some of the tools. And the final one, to start off the conversation, I'm thinking is cross-movement solidarity, so that we are not just constantly in our tiny little like queer feminist spaces, or just like Black feminist spaces, but moving the conversation across movements, right? So that we are also speaking to people in the climate justice sector. We are speaking to young people who are not feminists, right? And don't necessarily understand what feminism is, but making it make sense to them why holding the line is important in their own way. And if I'm using the protest that we've had in the country most recently, like seeing people from like people who fought for independence, right? It was really moving to see like anti-colonial mashujaz on the streets with young people, right? And all of us asking for like economic justice in this country. So that was really inspiring. And if you look very closely, feminists are in these conversations, are leading these conversations, because I personally believe that all movements require feminists and feminist politic and feminist analysis for us to be moving in a just and fair way. Yeah. Back to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much. We're going to get into cross-movement solidarity shortly, but I think we did notice in these past couple of years how powerful protest can be in effecting change. But I especially love what you've said about knowledge sharing and education, because often feminists are the thought leaders when it comes to identifying the problems in society and trying to effect change. And it's very difficult work to have non-feminists understand why it is you're so angry about this thing, why are you protesting this thing? And it's simply because they don't have the knowledge. So I think it's a call to us as feminists to be more forgiving of people and more giving of our resources. I really like that. So I want to jump to Mikali briefly because of something that you've said. Mikali, I wanted to ask you, what are the biggest barriers currently, in as far as you can tell, preventing collaboration across feminist organizations and movements, and how can they be overcome?
Thank you so much, Jaira, and I hope I'm audible to the listeners and comrades and friends. Happy International Human Rights Day. To all of us liberators who do this work with a lot of passion, with a lot of conviction. From my end, I'm seeing it a bit differently. I don't think there's something that prevents us from collaborating. We have seen movements like ourselves collaborating with GALC, INEND, Legal Arc, and even with you guys as feminists in Kenya, different spaces like femicide movement in Kenya. So for me, it's not like people are not collaborating. People have been collaborating. However, from a movement perspective, not NGO perspective, is that the fact that some of the programs that people are resourced are being put into silo, it makes the work a bit challenging, because movement work, it's our daily lived reality. Jaira, like your life is a lot of intersectionality of many things. You're fighting for housing, you're fighting for your rights, you're fighting not to be discriminated, you're fighting Ruto must go, you're fighting GMO, you're fighting every man of things. And when you're fighting all these man of things, one of the barriers that we can say as movement people, and I stand to be corrected also with comrades in the room, it has been also the way the government and states are moving in terms of having restrictive laws that are also shrinking civil society, NGOs to be operating, and even social movement. And I can give you this example whereby we know there's now the PBO Act, where it was being approved or being put in place. They had not factored in the role of also community-based organization. And community-based organization, you all know, as feminist movements, a lot of us are registered as community-based organization. However, we have also the Community-Based Act, which does not allow most of us, including Chomekali here and Pusipa and the rest, to be registered. They want you to do tree planting. So it's now, they are pushing many of the organizations, and I know there are like some groups within the community that have taken this case to court. Not if you are called, let's say, Kenya Sex Workers Alliance or GALC, you're told you have to change the name or the mandate has to change. So you have to go to the level of doing tree planting, what the government, in short, conforming. So these are the barriers because it's making a lot of grassroots organizations now get blacklisted, getting also not approved to be operating within the system. We are seeing issues of taxation. We are giving so much tax to the government, whereas the government is not doing so much. And we know a lot of grassroots movements and also feminist movements, not only just in Kenya, but across the continent. We are not well funded. Like corruption work. The corruption work has a lot of money. I don't know why. Not that the work is not important, but feminist work, as Eve said, we don't have money. Even queer work, we don't have money. And then also we are seeing issues to do also with the criminalization of feminists. We are in an era, even within 16 days of activism, we are talking about TFGPV. That's technology facilitated gender-based violence. There's been a trend, I don't know if you all have been observing, of criminalizing movement leaders and movements. So if we are criminalizing movement leaders and movements, how do you expect us to move, Jaira? And to continue doing this democracy work and liberatory work. So these are some of the barriers. And then wellness, this work is so intense. We are operating in an intense work, and the work is very intimate in our body. And now when I'm talking about this intense, I can give you an example because we are talking beyond just Kenya in terms of democracy. Comrades, we are seeing comrades from Tanzania and Kenya, we are seeing comrades from Uganda. We are knowing how the elections are moving. We are saying all of us, the finals are in Kenya, semifinals are in Uganda, January. So you find we have to pick so much in terms of respondent protection and safety within our own space of organizing, which becomes a little crazy. And then final, as I give my submission because of time and the rest of the panelists have to speak, we saw from End Femicide, we saw also from the Reject Finance Bill, the civic space is not safer for all of us. When you're going to the street, you're not sure if you're going to be harassed sexually, you're going to be beaten or to be raped. So already the civic space, even within East Africa, we have seen also what has happened in Tanzania, is that women are getting abused, queer people are getting abused within the democratic space of protest. So our right to protest as much as is shrinking for the constituency in the community. But for us, the fact also we are movement leaders, including ourselves in this call as panelists, we are our biggest targets within this space, including people living with disability. So these are some of the barriers, but I can also talk about it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. You've raised some important points there with regard to how the state utilizes its tools to stifle us and to force us into conformity, to force us to quote unquote organize within acceptable areas of political movement building. So I wanted to go back to Eve and ask, in light of this stifling by the state, what new forms of feminist organizing do you imagine or do you envision or do you believe can most effectively connect the rural, the regional, we've spoken about Uganda, Tanzania, as well as the larger global struggles when you go into Sudan, Congo, Palestine, in this time of stifling of democracy and justice across the globe? What do you envision?
Thank you, Jer. I'm thinking the moment I hear this question, the first thing that comes to mind is decolonization. And I know we've said this so many times that now it kind of loses its buzz. But for sure, if we decolonize our feminisms and we queer our feminisms and we look at Black and African feminisms, then we tackle most of these issues of like class, race, sexuality, gender identity that fragment the feminist movement, quote unquote. And when we do this decolonizing work authentically and with wanting to know and wanting to be better, then I'm thinking those solidarities will form and will come, because there's no way you would be doing feminist work, right, and leaving behind people in the rural area, or leaving behind people from a particular tribe, or people of a particular gender identity or social class, right? So I'm thinking that knowledge, creation, knowing, and unknowing is one of the ways that I see it happening, because the best forms of feminisms that I have seen, wanted to learn from, or participate in, have been those that have done the work of decolonization and properly continue to do that work, right? And when we do that work, then we tap into our, I don't say authentic, but like I think authentic is the word, way of being as Africans, as queer Africans, as queer feminists, right? So we talk about ways of, for example, knowledge sharing through storytelling and art. We talk about not hoarding resources and redistribution, right? Like that comes naturally. We talk about bringing quote unquote things to people where they need them, right? So like portable feminism and portable models of like training, of resource sharing, of legal political education. So these things don't just sit in one place, right? And when we do that, then we find that it's easy to build solidarity across like feminist circles. And if we go back to our way of doing things, right, things like community care, right, then become very accessible to us, because that's how we used to be. That's how our I don't want to say ancestors, but the people who came before us, who thought about this type of work, that is how it was supposed to be, that we take care of ourselves and each other. So we move from just self to collective care. And that's how we are able to continue this work, like creating healing spaces, safety networks, and some of these things that transcend class, background, gender identity, right? And we stop being like, those are queer feminists and those are this type of feminists. Then we become like a movement that can, to answer your question, like cross generations and connect beyond regions and struggles, right? So that you see that our struggles are connected, and how we liberate ourselves is how we liberate ourselves is by liberating each other, I think.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that once again, it comes down to knowledge and knowledge sharing. And often, aside from lived experience, variations in the amount of knowledge that someone has is what tends to create different ideological differences amongst the feminist movement. So I wanted to come to Vivian and ask, how do you think we could bridge these ideological differences within the movement while still working together towards a shared goal? How do we put aside our differences or teach and learn from one another, even as we work towards some common goals?
Thank you so much, Njahira, and thank you so much to the panelists as well for sharing your very insightful comments and reflections. On the question of ideological differences, I want to share a little story from one of the feminist meetings I was privileged to attend recently. And in this meeting, the conversation was basically about whether or not, as feminists, our task is to confront individual men, and whether we are confronting a patriarchal system, right? And in this space, we were validating a feminist document. So we were having conversations, really a debate about whether we should name men as individual men as perpetrators within this document, or just name the patriarchal system as, the system in which feminists confront. And as the conversations continued, we could see that the debate then became really tense in a way, because actually a huge part of the room were for naming individual men in this document as perpetrators. And then the other faction was saying that, actually our task is to confront these patriarchal systems. And I brought up something that I feel maybe resonated with the room, right? So if we name men as the sole oppressors in this document, we're going to have to name then white women, for instance. We're going to have to name cisgender women as perpetrators as well. We're going to have to name able-bodied people. We're going to name Black men in the ways that they experience patriarchy to, oppress Black women, for instance. And so it became very clear that in our different identities, we are perceived, and of the different privileges that we are perceived as perhaps being oppressors to other people as well. And so our task as feminists is not really to engage, right, with individual groups or individual identities, but to engage with power and to acknowledge that the feminist movement, for instance, we are not just in contestation with gender, but we are in constant contestation with power as it travels across race, across class, across ability, across geographies as well. And so it is very important that we acknowledge that, in fact, a lot of the ideological differences that we have in the feminist movements are actually fundamentally a question of power, and they come in the sense of whose feminism gets validated more, right? Whose identities get validated and engaged with more or acknowledged more, which style of organizing is prioritized more, which strategies, which tactics are prioritized more, what is our relationship as feminists with the state, right? For example, we have feminists who may engage actively with the state. There are feminists who say we are grassroots organizers and we're not going to, for example, engage with the state. So what is our relationship with even analyzing power? I know liberal feminists, their analysis of power is quite liberal. It's quite, they are more open to getting a seat at this table of oppression that oppresses all of us. Radical feminists may say, remove the entire table. We want to create a new table. Marxist feminists may say, we want, it's a question of class for us. It's a question of economic injustice for us. And so we are not going to hear you when you say, for instance, you want to be able to be a girl boss. We don't relate with that because for us, it is fundamentally a question of class. And there are also feminists who are saying, and maybe I'll talk about this a bit later, that, we are feminists, but we don't necessarily identify with trans women, or we don't want to engage queer folks in our feminism, right? And so we see all these ideological differences then becoming a question of power. And I think that it is important that as feminists, we name these power hierarchies, we name them very honestly and, acknowledge them within the spaces that we exist in. But also as an activist and an organizer for the quite past few years, it's been long actually, for the few years I've organized, I feel that I've come to a place where I perceive ideological differences as part of the work, as part of the everyday work that we have to confront. This is it. This is the work, and in articulating then ideological differences, it has come to a place where we need to name the difference between, that there's a difference between harm, right, and difference within the space. So difference might be we disagree on something like strategy, right? You say, for example, in the end femicide movement, we are not going to approach the government in this and this way. And there's another side that says you're going to approach the government in this and this way. And there's another side that says we are not going to approach the government at all. We are mostly going to organize with people, right? I see that as a difference. And harm within the movement is things like violence, things like homophobia, things like racism, things like, actual discrimination against groups of people. That is harm. And I think it is important that we create space for difference within our movement, so that because we must acknowledge that we have a multiplicity of experiences. We have a multiplicity of knowledge, of analysis, of being, and right, we have to create space for all these differences to coexist in one movement. But we cannot create space then for harm. Feminists must create a hard boundary, zero tolerance for harm in our movements, right? Because I've seen with rising conservatism, I want to say that feminists are also prone to falling for fascist seduction, right? Feminists can be convinced by fascism. And so we have seen even in feminist spaces, people saying, they're not going to speak about Palestine, for instance, or their feminism does not include trans people. So we must create a space where we say that, no, this is not what feminism is. There's no room for you. Feminism does not allow all perspectives. Sorry, we cannot have that in the movement, but still create space for true difference within the space, so that we acknowledge that we are one as a movement, but we are not the same, right? We are not the same based on the fact that we have just multiplicity of experiences. And so therefore, we must carry each other within the movement. I think that would absolutely then help us navigate the different ideological differences. Yeah.
Thank you. That was so, you've taken us on a beautiful journey of understanding how ideological difference matters. But something else that you've brought up that's, I think, fairly important is the power hierarchies themselves. When we talk about hierarchies, it could be, I feel like at the end of the day, it all falls back to the question of money, because right now we're speaking about the loss of aid and funding and how states can also crack down and prevent you from organizing as you would like to when those hierarchies appear. And usually the better resourced feminists are probably the older ones, the white ones, and so on. A negative example, for instance, is J.K. Rowling and this group of lesbians in Scotland having the finances to overturn trans rights in the UK. So when we think about that negative side of power structures and power hierarchies, and how it's often the feminists who are older than us or of a different race and so on who end up effecting greater change, I wanted to ask you, Erica, in your experience, what forms of intergenerational organizing have you seen to be working, and how can we nurture these forms of intergenerational organizing?
Okay, cool. One way in my experience that I think is really working is popular political education. I mean, in Kenya, there is a very strong need to build a big political movement to counter the elite, right? And that's what we see with the youth protests, the Gen Z, the so-called Gen Z protests last year, right? Where a lot of young people showed up in the streets. But one of the biggest challenges that we had was that it wasn't grounded in specific political principles. It wasn't grounded behind decolonial, anti-capitalist movements, right? It was mostly around corruption, debt, but not around the root systemic causes, right? And so we really need a movement that is grounded in political principles and the ideology itself, right? And in bridging that political ideology, right, we need popular political education. But when it comes to traditional ways of teaching, of building political consciousness, right, we have the banking model of education, which always institutes hierarchy in the way we are transferring knowledge from older people to younger people, right? And we really need is it Frarian, political education systems that actually are not influenced by the Western model of education, and we are passing knowledge to each other as equal partners and already valuing our already existing experience as expertise in itself, which oftentimes ends up being dismissed in intergenerational organizing. Yeah.
Thank you, Erica. I love how you've casually quoted Paulo Freire. So I guess what you're saying, what we need is that we need a pedagogy of the oppressed. And this is what brings together different generations of people, right? I think as we wrap up this particular section, I want to go to Oreo. We've spoken about how one aspect of these power hierarchies is the amount of money or resources that a group has. So according to you, Oreo, what are the most effective tactics for grassroots feminist organizing in restrictive or low resource environments?
So first of all, this looks like showing communities their power, their collective power, and the power they have continued to own throughout the years. So let's looking like the chamas that they have, those are informal meeting spaces that they also come together to try and bring up their economic empowerment and finances. So these are some of the spaces that restrictive and low resource environments have taken to be able to just organize themselves, looking at even informal organizing, such as the market associations, faith actors. These are people that we can, as feminists, we can leverage on to just get our message across and get their solidarity with us, because they have the social capital that most of us do not have. They have, they can leverage on the seats that they have and people they're connected to, in terms of restrictive, low resources. Holding dialogues within communities has also worked. This is mostly using their lived realities to just have conversations and see how the injustices that they face unite them together at different capacities, and how all sides of feminists can come together to have one voice in dignity and in non-discrimination. So how do we bring these conversations to the communities for them to take shape on themselves without us necessarily just having these capacity buildings over and over again? How do we seed this information into the communities through the lived realities? Like how we've seen how leaders of movements are alienated, and the shrinking civic spaces. This comes into an advantage because now there's no one to hold accountable for the conversations being had. Let's say it's dignity, access to health. If all of us, despite of our different differences, we are facing this health problem. If we come together and start having conversations on how the health problems in our communities are affecting us, these conversations just take a life of their own. And by default, like by giving back the responsibility to the people that have really been put in these positions to use their salaried positions to push on good policies and all that, we really need to have conversations stemming from the grassroots. And this looks like also giving capacity building, as you've said, like in a sustainable way, because we've seen that capacity building comes and goes. With the funding, it also comes and goes. So what are we left with? What can the community have within themselves? Like the Gen Z movement, what it did is it brought into light the sort of misconceptions and propaganda that people had in saying, now, you want the prices of bread to be reduced. Now we have reduced the prices of bread. You can leave the street. But all people are saying this is more than the prices of bread. This looks like the kind of people you're putting in positions of power. Do they have the knowledge to run the ministries that you're giving them? And how does this translate to how that grassroots woman or man or gender non-conforming person or queer person gets their services? So who is at these positions? They have the power to influence that. So showing communities the power that they have without, with the absence of funding, with the absence of just being limited by political movements, and leveraging on that can really be a powerful way of existing in times of restrictive and low resources.
Thank you. This sounds like another side of the coin to what Erica was saying. The power, the very immense power as a resource that the grassroots have in terms of the knowledge that they yield, and moving away from this condescending idea of we bring knowledge and resources to the rural and the grassroots areas, but also seeing them as being extremely powerful sources of information about the cost of living and all these other things. And I would also, apart from Paulo Freire, I would mention Walter Rodney, who has a book called The Groundings with My Brothers, where he speaks about, so Walter Rodney was an academic, but he went to the gullies of Jamaica, to the poorest people in Jamaica, not to condescend on them and tell them about what their rights are and and how to destroy capitalism, but to actually have that cultural exchange and to listen to them. Like, we can learn from each other. It shouldn't be this idea that a certain class of people is educating another one. If anything, the people at the grassroots know more than the people in the ivory towers. So as we wrap up this section about solidarities and organizing, I welcome the panelists to chime in however they want. I know Eve would like to go first.
Thank you. Thank you again. I just wanted to add a comment when Vivian spoke about difference and allowing for difference within the feminist movement, right? It reminded me of Audre Lorde's quotes. I looked it up really quickly so that I have it in my mind. And I was just like, when she talks about difference and she says that as women, we've been taught to either ignore our differences or to view them as causes for separation and suspicion. She goes further to say that without community, there's no liberation. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist, right? And I really love that, and Vivian's point about creating room for our differences. Like, just because we are doing this work together and we're in this movement together does not mean that we have to be the same and we have to agree on everything and we have to have the same point of view. That is such a lie, right? And that actually erases what I believe my feminism is, right? We should be able to allow for differences, right? And have a hard boundary, like Vivian said, for harm. But differences should not be the reason why we can't work together or why we are not working together, right? So yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of my tens to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And even this monolithic idea of everyone having the same beliefs and backgrounds is ridiculous. Does anybody else want to chime in on this conversation about movement building? Rachel, I saw some fingers. Okay.
Yes. So I want to be a bit political, not a bit political mindset. Let's shift a bit from our own feminist mindset, but try to understand how politicians work, how the state works. In terms, we are saying, let's reimagine feminist solidarity and movements. One of the things that we need to learn, and I see this happening, don't call me a prophet of intel or co-option. I see it happening in January before the anniversary of End Femicide on 27th of January. Let's be prepared and also put strategy. I know INET, GALC, and also Legal Act also, you are good with strategy. And these were also our own feminist movement. We need to come in. There's a politician, there's a way we need to understand as feminists. It's politics and I love hearing the ballot concept. We are not on a coffee date. We are talking about power. And I remind these people, hiyo si story ya jaba. And when I mean story ya jaba in Jaira, you can translate that, and I want to be very brief without taking time. Politicians, they don't solve problems, especially when there's a crisis. They put optics. We have seen these optics when it comes to public statements without action. Wamama tuwapatia 100 million. Wamama mmeuliwa. Wamama, that's, number one in Kenya. There's a task force we put in place. Public hangers, manage. Rachel hunger, rudi chini. And feminists in Kenya, hunger, rudi chini. Because there's a task force. And if you react, you're told you're angry, bitter feminist. They are not also keen, and time like this, even today, they use these days to rebrand themselves. And we have seen it on TV, on news, so now they are rebranding themselves as government. You have pro-human rights reports here and there. The other thing is that they control movements, our movements, all of us. They don't confront so that we see they are good. They'll invite some of us to meetings, closed door consultation, we clap, we engage in policy making. They would also create government spaces where some favorable feminist and human rights organizations would be invited. If you fight as feminists, you're told, oh, no, mama kona mashida mingi. Our lesbian, our watu wa ghetto, wezi pangika, they can't discuss. And they know we don't have resources. That's the reality. Ruto knows. Where you go, girl, to look for resources, where government of Kenya, State Department on Gender will go and look for resources. So they know how to weaponize that. It's the reality. And I think we need to move our mind to assume we don't do these things. The other part that I really want us to think through, because we're talking about democracy, and we're heading to election, is around security as an ultimate threat. They know very well democracy is failing, and when the state is failing, they need to invest a lot on surveillance. a lot on intimidation, a lot on arrest, misuse of morality laws, which also they usually use during election. Hawa ni mashoga, hawa ni feminist, hawa wameiba mabwana, mabibi, kila kitu. The NGO one I talked about. So what are the things that we need to look into? And I'll encourage all of you from SAC, Strategic Issue Research Council perspective. All of us now, we need to work on Geneva Consensus Declaration to make this fail. One, referring to my point of number 1 of next year, before the end femicide anniversary. If, for example, they give us a report, it does not resonate on trans women, does not resonate on queer people, it does not resonate on sex worker, what's our strategy? Back to you, Vivian. What are our strategy? Because the report will come and we'll clap. We did work, we mobilized. So after the report, and I'm telling you, it might not come the way we want. Because the people who oppress us are these men in power position. This is politics. Politics, see, viva, ni another level. And also they know very clearly, they put in delay tactics so that we get exhausted. They'll never pass laws, but they'll say, we have heard you and we are hearing. But when it comes to their interest, these politicians, they know, and I'll tell you from someone who lives in the ghetto, they'll never solve this problem because they want to use it next time for their political mileage. So if, for example, I know I need to come and say ndawatengenezea nyumba mzuri, or women's rights matter, or feminist rights matter, then why do I need you people? It's about number. So it goes back to us even as feminist movement and grassroots organization and I-end NGO, understanding clearly that this is politics. And some of us, Vivian, it's true, will be called on the room. Different equation, different tactics, and different contexts. And this is the reality. Let us not assume we don't know reality. This is the reality. The same way even within the feminist movement, there are those who know Kizungu, they are mababi, and it's okay. We don't say feminism appear to go masculine. We're all fighting for good life. We're all fighting for justice, and we're all fighting for the liberation. So also, people also work with feminist movements, even including funders and partners. They need to understand we are fighting for good life. So we should not say, if you're fighting for good life, Eve is bad life, or Eve not to be supported to be able to do this work. Because politicians, I can tell you, I work in the ground, I've worked with these politicians. In reality, that they hold each other's stake. Let's analyze the way Raila was buried. Our politicians, we thought they were enemies. They went all the way from Kenya to India to bring Jacob. And all of us, some of us are fans of Jacob, including myself. Even if we don't agree politically and ideologically some level, but also we can't deny their roles even Jacob played for this movement, this feminist movement, and this social justice movement. But the other last point I need to put in for us, even movement leaders that are part of this call, is that let's always understand the real political goal based on what if you and you are saying. We might not agree on some other issues and ideology, but if you're very clear the way we did it with end femicide, the clear political goal, whether utaenda kwa boardroom, is femicide issue. The clear political goal, Gen Z did their best and all generation. It was reject finance bill, it was reject, whichever the route, some we agree, some we don't agree, but work was done. And I think also these are things we need to understand. Tunadili na power, tunadili na people who have money for intelligence. That's why also it's important as feminists, we have money for intelligence gathering. What does intelligence gathering mean, Jaira? It means pesa intelligence, ainanga receipt. That's the reality. If you're about to confront power, you confront you in a receipt. I'll tell you for free. Pick it, leave it, but this is the reality. That's why you will see the way intelligence in the airport, when you leave, they know umeshatoka nje ya nchi. When you go to drink a certain club, they know. Because they know if they leave a receipt, there's a trail. So it's also important, even within, we understand as feminists, how does security operate beyond safety and protection, or we have to move you from this level to this level as a human rights defender. Asante.
I like that. Thank you so much for your prophetic message, not only for prophesying January, but you've prophesied the next segment that I wanted to get into, which is politics, elections, and governance. And I would like us to touch on some salient bits that you've raised there. For instance, going back to Eve, Rachel has raised the idea of clearing the ballot. This is the second electoral season that we're going in with this campaign about clearing the ballot. And we know how easy it is for our movements to be co-opted, as Rachel was trying to put across. So as we approach yet another political season, politicians are already campaigning. We're already trying to see how we can get in what capacities we can get in. How can feminist approaches reimagine governance beyond achieving quotas and representation?
Thank you, Njera. I feel like when we are talking about politics, even just globally, right? Not just in Kenya, minorities, and I'm using minorities loosely here, but people who've been minoritized by either age, race, gender, sexuality, all of these things, we get caught up in representation politics and identity politics, right? So that just so we keep saying this thing is bad, this thing is bad, this thing is bad. Then they're like, okay, give us Rachel to represent you in this messed up committee, right? And we give them our Rachel, and that's that, right? And for a long time, even I was caught up in representation, right? I was like, I want to see more queer people, I want to see more Black people, I want to see, and then quickly realized, oh my goodness, like it is easier to co-opt people than it is to structurally change systems, right? And I'm quickly now redirecting my energy from representation politics, right? So moving into this election, like I just don't want us to get caught up in representation. That just because we have 1, 2, 3 women being put up for elective positions or nominative positions, then that is enough to silence us, right? Like we are going to a political party and we're saying these things are wrong with for example, ODM, right? We meet them and we're like, oh, if you want us to back you and to back your candidate, these are the things that are wrong with your system and these are the things that need change. And then they're like, no, listen, just give us one queer person and we're going to make them the senator. And then, do you know what I mean? And then we're like, listen, hata kama ni mbaya, let's just, it's fine. I want us to want more. Like, I feel like our self-esteem has been beaten so badly that now we are so quick to settle for crumbs, right? I want us to dream. I want us to dream bigger and ask for more and have the audacity to want more. And I feel like that is how we get out of this system. And Kenya is in a really, really good, okay, it seems bad, it feels bad, it hurts, but I feel like we're in that good cusp where things could get really, really better. Like we are that, when you're at that line where you could just push it, and for once it could just go our way, or it could regress so badly. So we are lucky to be in this generation where we can see Kenya literally at the cusp of either really good or really bad. And I feel like it is our job. And if we're talking about democracy and governance and politics as one of the way in which we achieve liberation for ourselves and our communities, we have to dream bigger than other people, right? And you can see even in the conversations online when you're talking about the next president of this country, and people are quick to be like, all we have to do is remove the bad one. How we do it does not matter. Do you get? And sometimes I kind of disagree. I'm just like, okay, fine. I'm all for removing the bad one. But and then what? And then what? We can't be settling for mediocre. Do you get? And we're just like, oh, this one is good enough. I'm like, no, I need to see his plans. I need to see like what he has, what are his opinions about women? What are his opinions about people minoritized by sexuality and gender? I want to see what he said about gay men in 2007. Do you know, like I want more. And I feel like it is our responsibility to dream. And even though sometimes when we are asked, when we dream and ask, we are told we are being too ambitious, there are people who've done it. There are people who've done it. And I usually look, for example, at New Zealand and Chile, who had like a feminist government. Brazil, who elected like a feminist president after a really terrible one, right? Like the one before was just like as bad as Trump. And then Brazil was just like, enough. We can do better and we can want better. And this babe, literally in the first 100 days in office, did the things that she said she was going to do, right? Very trans inclusive, very queer sent, very like pro-Black, and very, do you know, the things that the feminist movement had wanted and just could just dream of in Brazil. Like it felt like they were being insane to try to come from what they had to their dream. So yeah, I'm feeling like as we're approaching this political season, we hold the dream. I want to hold the dream. I want to hold the dream for Kenya, like for a better political environment, for better governance, for better leaders, right? Because this is one of the ways in which we liberate ourselves. A failed Kenya, a failed state, is not a state where like feminist organizing can thrive. I know that for myself. So I have to do the work of making sure that Kenya becomes a place where my work and the work of my colleagues can continue to thrive. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have to dream extremely audaciously because for the past 15 years, we've been trying to implement the two-thirds gender rule with what levels of success? Like, can we say that the women that get into these offices are the women that we want to represent us, you know? Is idle representation enough, or should we actually be demanding, like you've said, of our leaders? Erica, go ahead.
I just wanted to come in quickly and talk about, chime into this conversation that you're already having on representation. And specifically as a climate justice organizer, right? Over the past couple of years, right? There have been lots of calls like, we need youth on the decision-making table. We need youth on the decision-making table. We need them represented, right? But youth on the decision-making table in itself is not a silver bullet solution. Because one thing is that unless those youth also have the right politics, then them being on the decision-making table could also them pushing like oppressive views, right? And that is what I've seen in my climate justice work, right? Young people acting as mouthpieces for corporates, pushing for carbon markets and other false solutions that are actually displacing indigenous communities on the continent, right? And one thing is that representation is not liberation. That is one thing. Representation is not liberation. Unless those very young people on the decision-making table that are represented have the radical politics, then they are also part of the problem. For years, we've been calling for the first US president, the first UN Secretary General who's a woman and all that. But black faces in high places will not save us. We saw the hand at the UN Security Council vetoing the ceasefire in Gaza. Whose hands was that? It was a black woman's hand. In Kenya, unaona nani anafanyiwa bujubuju na Ruto? It is the Kenyan woman with absolutely no politics. Na hao ndio mama tunangoja watu represent, you know? And that is the challenge with the representationalist politics, right? Is that the two-third gender rule, unless these women actually had the radical politics, then they'd also be part of the problem. They'll be manufacturing consent for oppression of other women, right? And that is what plagues actually Kenyan politics, is that if it is women, it is actually classed women, right? Who are very disconnected from the realities of the majority of women in the grassroots, right? And so some of the policies they're even pushing are just disastrous for majority of women. And that is why I don't even like women feminist politics from class women specifically, with 50% of women on boards, or like the first US women president, or that kind of thing. Because basically the first woman president is like the first female genocide there you are asking for, you know? That's the thing. We don't need inclusion of women in an inherently patriarchal system. We need the dismantling of that system so that representation within an inherently toxic system is actually extremely harmful, right? And we are just putting female faces to inherently oppressive systems, right? And the thing with the ballot specifically, because there is the conversation on queering the ballot, right, is that since colonialism, since flag independence, basically, we have been set up for failure because the left have been purged from electoralist politics in Kenya, right? We had very radical far left leaders, Akina Pio, Gamapinto, Akina Nani, and a lot of Western propaganda put far right leaders into mainstream Kenyan politics, like in Jomo Kenyatta, right? And from that on to the other regimes, Moi era, one party state rule, that kind of thing, only Kanu, we have no space for the left in mainstream electoralist politics. So that what we have to do during election time is either choosing from oppressor A or oppressor B. We don't have any other option, right? And then we are asking, ai, wewe ndio ulivotia Ruto. Now option B ilikuwa nini? See, it was also another oppressor. So and so when young people say, we are not voting, and then lazy political science analysis goes something like young people are apathetic. No, that is not apathy actually, because if you hear clearly, they are saying electoralism is not working. That is actually a very strong political position that is drawn out of strong scientific analysis of the situation of what is at play here, right? And so I think that that's the same thing with queer people on the decision making table. Unless we actually have radical queer people, that's not gonna work. It ain't gonna do anything for anybody. And at the same time, if we don't build a massive political popular education system, even electoralism in itself is set up for failure. Because let's be honest with the current reality is that Western propaganda has actually worked, and we don't have class consciousness. We don't have the political consciousness for electoralism to actually work in the first place, right? And the politics that people are actually looking for is good governance. Good governance is not a politic if that person is capitalist. It's not, and running on a platform of corruption itself, that is not any politic in the first place. And so, unless we have a political movement, right, that is actively political conscious, even electoralism will not save us. That is the other thing. So, no matter what kind of representation you want there, we also have to engage with the masses in a leftist, socialist political movement and build that political consciousness. Otherwise, we're just setting queer people up for failure on the ballot.
You're absolutely right. That's very well said. Please put down your hand for the purposes of my moderation. Somebody in the comments has said that even the most well-meaning person, when they get into these systems, will be swallowed by this cannibalistic system. And it calls to mind what Audre Lorde says about the master's tools can never destroy the master's house. This idea that we are going into an established system adopted from our colonizer, and we hope that we can somehow radicalize it might even become an exercise in futility. So back to Rachel, as we are trying to, undo these structures, exist within the system, because we cannot ignore the system, right? We're just dreaming of futures where we can actually undo these structures. How can feminist movements hold governments accountable without becoming co-opted by political parties or by state structures?
Ndela, you put me on spot, huh? Both feminist political mindsets, Kenyan mindset and African mindset. I think one, and I know like there are comrades here, including Eve, can tell you, even from some of our conversation and many comrades that I'm seeing on the call. And even most of us, the beauty is that most of us have seen you in big boards, including myself, of Global North, representing. And there's been a beauty of also learning from those boards. Some work, some don't work, even spaces. Even I can give an example when I joined Amnesty in the port. I think what I knew and what I expected were two totally different things. And this is the reality of also our organizing. I'm in a point where I say our life is contradicting with the work we do. And now we are talking politics. By the way, politics is a different ball game. Let's be honest, all of us we know. I agree. You cannot, from an Audre Lorde perspective, you cannot break the masters, whatever the masters tool. But we know there are people who have already broken it, true or false. They have joined and changed things. And I can give a good example of our comrade Commander, who works at the Kenya National Human Rights Commission, who does amazing work with most of us, uses government access and everything to support the movement, and is inside the system. Let's agree. We know people like Crystal Lasike, who works with disability rights. I used to sit with Crystal in Amnesty Board, and beyond that, we also friends. And that we all know the work Crystal has done with disability rights, and even within ODM. People like Kathy Muma, I'm trying to give this example. Kathy Muma, who was also former commissioner, and the work she has done with ODM also, the work she has, the all senator, the work she has done also within the system. with teenage pregnancy, radical feminist organizing, changing the shift also with women representation. Here to Tadimongea, Jaira, which is something also we need to unlock. It has its also in politics. But also, we have seen comrades who used to say on the streets, like Mohamed Ali, is it Mohamed Ali? Jichopevu turned to be an oppressor. From Jichopevu, social justice, all of us clapping, forming good things, but now during the system, it becomes the oppressor of what he was advocating. These are realities. We have seen also comrades, I don't want to mention even from county MCAs that I know were also close friends, that when they joined in, mambo ilibadilika. So for me, I mean, the level, yes, we can dismantle, but also look in terms of what is strategic for us at the moment. South Africa is a good example. Apartheid, people fought. We all celebrate and inspired by the struggle in South Africa. But however, we know South African gained, and Vivian, who were with you at Jazz Global School for Feminists, South Africa gained political representation and not economic representation. Also following Erica's point in terms of also which queer people are we presenting for political seats. But also we know clearly we need political parties. Some can be independent. Some we are forced, even if we don't agree on tribal lines, to go back to our community. There's a level, let's be honest, if you touch Mwikali, all the cow will come. If you touch Mwikali, all the Gero people will come, for example. Whether it is a goons, but in reality. Ama, if you touch feminists, even me, I'll come. If you touch feminist organization, all of us will come, because we're like, this is our interest, we have to protect. So for me, I cannot give you, Jaira, like which is the right or the wrong answer, but for me, it's about us as movement. Where do we agree in terms of strategy and tactics that works for us? Sometimes the end goal might matter, but sometimes the end goal might not matter. The process might matter. We know clearly for you to, now the politics are changing. Rao is not there in the bigger picture. It's both good and also bad in this sense of also our organizing. That we have to admit that sometimes people need representation. Even if we talk, let's also be honest, even within our own feminist organizing, tuna share power, but in reality, it's one person who makes the decision. Two of them. It's only one, even within the donor space. It's like, oh, we are funding and a registered group, we are funding feminist movement, but you know clearly reality is different. However, there are good also funders within this space. So for me, it's just for us to be able to analyze what has worked, even within the maendeleo ya wanawake, which even now I'm telling them, hata nitaka nivae kwa hiyo maendeleo ya wanawake. Feminist mbona yuko ndani na kitambo walikuwa, sasa watu conservative wako huko. But also it's a challenge on our end. When these positions open, I usually tell people, mi malina fit nikiona na qualify mu apply. Wacha wakanikatae huko. Niwaambie mlinikataa kwa nini? Hata kama sina qualifications zingine mu apply. Ndio niulize maswali ngumu. Sometimes unaweza kosa kufika lakini ufike mahali. Because we know clearly when we have our own person inside, they can give us intel. When we have our own person inside, they can tell us what's going on. And I think that's where politicians do it well, that we need to learn, even if we might not agree with strategy, even from how religious they work, is that when they have there someone outside, politics, unaambia mtu piga kelele huko nje, lakini huku ndani tuko pamoja. Politics. We have seen even from climate, and Erica, you can correct me, Total, huku tunaipiga, lakini they are funding some activists huko nje, tupige kelele. Ndio onekane hii story ni serious, so that also they're able to get the mileage and everything. We saw with affordable housing also. Ruto saying imepatiwa watu wa ghetto, but reality, if you don't have $1 million, uja deposit kwa affordable housing, hakuna story affordable. What affordable is affordable. But if we have our people inside the system, they're able to give us intel that also advances our campaigns and our work in terms of advocacy, which also takes us back to first beyond feminist, I'm a Kenyan, an active citizen who pay tax. So before election, what I usually tell people, and already I've started with some around SRHR and also in femicide, kama mwanasiasa ongelele interest yetu, hakuna kura. Now you are very clear from MCA to govern and everything. Let those our issues appear in their manifesto. Because one of the things we forget as feminists and activists and as Kenyans, when you're dealing with politicians, there is the manifesto, which is the most powerful. If our issues get to the manifesto, we're able to hold them accountable. And there is roadside declaration. Example, when Baba said, mtapatiwa 6,000, kila mtu tulikuwa, wamama, single mothers. But in reality, your 6,000 ilikuwa itoke wapi? Na iko kwa manifesto. Ruto, mama mboga, wheelbarrow, tutawapatia serikali ni yenyu. Hii serikali ni ya mama mboga. Women 50-50 representation. So I think we have to agree that there's benefit being inside sometimes, there's benefit being outside, there's benefit being out, like a cross-cutting with different equation. We're seeing it globally. It does not mean, for example, Suluhu is a feminist. All of us were celebrating when she got into power. Then a million one, including me when she got into power. And that's why I'm very forefront holding her accountable. The same way pia tupatia Ruto wakwe forefront to hold Ruto accountable. Wasikue nyuma, wakuwe mbele pia tusaidiane hii struggle, because where we are now is about us and our lives. It's no longer for which movement or not. It's about we are fighting for liberation and freedom, but as well safeguarding the work that has been done. I think even now, let's be mindful, whichever tactic we might use, let's safeguard the gains that we have used in all feminist work and women work. So expect Eve, expect Vivian, expect Jaira, expect Oreo, Erica, hata hiyo sijui inaitwaje hiyo mama hiyo ya political hiyo initangwa je ya mama hiyo wanasemanga inatumikanga kumobilize kura za wanasiasa. Tuingie huko, hata sio tukute huko within your own village level. Village elders tuchukue position, mambo ya nyumba 10 chukue position in your own plot, because they use that to set us up. Ndo wakati wanakuja tumejipanga. But if you're saying you want to fight this system and you're not creating an alternative system, or you're not part of the same system, you co-opt them, why underestimate our power that they're taking over after us and not us not taking over? So to co-opt, thank you.
Yeah, nothing is black and white. So like I said, we are imagining better systems, but we currently exist in this system. And I like how you've used that to give us another example of intelligence gathering. Ingia huko ndani kama sniper, collect the information and use it to build the systems that you want. Now let's go to Oreo. I think this is going to be the last question in this section because we're running out of time. Oreo, how do we ensure that rural, migrant, disabled, and LGBTQ plus voices are authentically included in governance conversations? Authentically. You're muted. Sorry. I was like, why can't I hear you? You're muted.
Sorry, looks like I've had a whole conversation with myself. So I'll begin. This basically just goes back to knowledge building and just giving people the power that they need, because knowledge brings agency, and agency now comes either from a personal perspective or from a community perspective. And this means that when someone knows about the injustice that they're facing and how they can counter that injustice, either as a person or as a community, it's easier to get these things going. For example, in Meru, we have different organizations that have come forward to help us see how we can have social accountability efforts within the grassroots areas. And this looks like queer people understanding corruption, understanding governance, understanding how they can monitor health systems within the county. And this is from an evidence-based point of view through collection of data. So when we're saying that the health system is not working for us, how is the community reporting on how this health system is not working for them? So if queer people are facing discrimination in health, if the community is also getting substandard services from the health center, how does that information then give us the power and the data that we need to come forward and say, if you are vying for a position in this constituent, these are our problems. Our health centers look like this, our roads look like this, our schools look like this, because all the issues that we have affect us generally, despite our sexuality, how we are. All these issues come together, and this also gives us a leverage in the community in saying that they'll not only see us as sexual beings or whatever they see us to be, but also as active participating members of the community. So we have forums like IDF that have come and trained the community on how to look at hospitals from a point of, is there medicine, is there this? And they report in an app that collects all this data and goes to the Ministry of Health within the county. So working with all these officials to make sure that they are aware that there are people on the ground looking at the work they are doing and making these reporting mechanisms as anonymous as possible. So this is how our voices get to be heard, because our voices now get mixed up with other voices in the community. And when these services become better, they become better for all of us. And they even give us the leverage that we need. For example, when politicians come to the ground and they're looking for women's groups to go dance in their rallies and give them lessons and everything, when they get these women with a clear list of demands that the maternity is not working, our markets are not working, our climate looks like this, and we don't have sustainability methods to like help the community. When this politician goes to this community and they find a list of demands from these people and another list of demands from those people, I don't think at the end of the day they'll all come collectively to run away from the list of demands. We will have the data on the ground. We will have people who are informed, who are ready to represent their own voices, because most of the time we have the voice to say this is what is happening to us, but the minute you stand and you look different, they'll tell you, si wewe ni ule umekuwa ukifanya hivi ama nini nini nini. So they have that thing to like keep you quiet when you're trying to bring your voice forward, but when you have the data, it's so hard to dispute the data, and the data goes on for a very long time. Also cultivating our allies who can speak for us, and not only for the issues that we stand for the issues that also affect them as a community, showing them how this unity also brings all our issues in one basket, because we live in these communities together. For example, for me, I tell them, you see a masculine presenting woman and you want to attack them, and then you normalize that kind of violence. And then the next time your cousin, your auntie, or whoever is in their mood of they just want to have a chill day and they're dressed in a way that is slightly masculine, and they'll get attacked because everyone else has just normalized that line of violence. So the minute we say yes to one thing, we're giving birth to a whole lot of issues that come together. Also being in this space has shown me that even when we're holding things like public participations, the people who are majorly affected by these issues are not at the table, because they are that woman who will leave her vegetable stand at the market and they won't get any form of income at the end of the day. They are that student who is in class, who is trying to catch up with, they are someone who's busy. But when we go and meet them at where they meet on their own time, in those women groups, in those churches that they go to, when churches actually also take up their responsibility to give people information, not only announcing a marriage menu for like 3 weeks, we can also say there's a finance bill out there for like 2 months. Like we have been brought up in a society that separates issues. We are religion, we don't want to deal with political. We are this, we don't want to deal with that. But at the end of the day, our lives are heavily connected. The institutions might separate their policies, but for us, we will go to church, we will go to school, we will go to the health center, and we will all basically be affected at the end of the day. So bringing our intersectionality to all the issues that affect us as humans, and just seeing how we can collect our data, we can keep our data, we can inform our voices beyond sustainability. Being in this field has shown me that a lot of the things fail because there is no sustainability on the ground. External funders come in, they take over the work, they're funding, but we have no one seated at the table asking, if these people go today, how are we going to extend this? This looks like the education system with the free primary education, and what happened to it. Sustainability was the problem. Now we are in health, and we are seeing that since the USAID funding was pulled out, we have other things coming out. So how does our sustainability look like from the community level upwards, through collecting our real data of the things that affect us, through informing ourselves, through creating these safe spaces where we can have conversations, and it doesn't feel like a push and a pull. It feels like all of us have these needs, and this needs as this community, and how are we coming together to say, I'll support you in this and I'll support you in that. And yeah, just like how End Femicide worked out. The streets were so full because to the day leading to the protest, people were out there saying, this is not whatever they're putting it to be, and this is not a gender war. This is basically women just being killed. And we can see that the numbers are even coming from relationships. So, what are we not doing? And what is the church not doing? And what are we should we collectively do as people to make sure that this goes on long term? So it looks like us creating allies who can speak for us. It looks like us also being able to come up with new technologies and new ways to store our meaningful data that we can share within our communities. And even if it starts now, by the time this we go to the elections and the new leaders take seats, we have a way to just monitor how they are implementing our priorities, which looks like us being able to go into these budgetary meetings at the county levels and saying, hizi priority umeweka, they do not serve the community. So these are the other things that we may need. But how do our communities know when the budgetary cycles are starting? So we need a lot of information to be out there, and we need a lot of institutions to just come together and say, this intersectionality is what is pulling us further away from the main goal, which is dignity, equality, and non-discrimination. So how do we sit at the table and just harmonize all those needs into one?
Sorry, I think it also goes back to what was being said earlier about ignoring ideological differences and focusing on what's important. As we are about to wrap up, let's touch on climate change and climate justice. I think I want Erica to give us some general overview thoughts on this because we don't have enough time to go deeply into it. Specifically, I'd like you, Erica, to speak to us on how climate change disproportionately impacts women and gender diverse people, and how should this shape our climate governance conversations, as well as what a feminist climate justice policy would look like.
Okay, sounds good. I'll try and do that in the 30 seconds and see if that will help.
You can take 5 minutes.
Okay, sawa. 5 minutes na unasema hakuna time. So the climate crisis definitely disproportionately affects women and gender diverse people, right? And in Kenya, we see that very clearly with how even the floods in the slums, right, where queer people were disproportionately affected. And even worse is that when it comes to receiving support, right, a lot of this support is still given within the gender binary, and a lot of queer people are left out in the end, right? In in the northern part of Kenya, we saw how the droughts exacerbated child marriage, where girls were being married off in order to be able to have an income to shield themselves from the effects of the drought, right? We see how the climate crisis leads to food shortages that exacerbate gender-based violence, right? We're already living in a very patriarchal country where a lot of the land and natural resources are owned by men, right? Only less than, is it 2% of all privately owned land is actually under the name of women or co-owned with women. And so in a very patriarchal world where women are left to do the farming, to do the work that is directly dependent on natural resources. When climate disasters hit, then they are on the front lines of the impacts of this crisis, right? But when we look at mainstream solution, women are of course leading the solutions, right? But when it comes to mainstream solutions of the climate crisis at the governance level, right, we're seeing something totally different where we have a capitalist neoliberalist Ruto regime, right, that prioritizes corporate interests over communities, right? And so those that have the direct say on shaping policy are not women, are not communities, are corporates, right? And that is why a lot of women and or communities are not even consulted when it comes to carbon markets projects, right? And I was reading a report yesterday that the total land area in Kenya that is dedicated to carbon markets is the same as that of arable lands. in Kenya. It is a huge percentage, millions of hectares of land, right? Put under the control of Western organizations and their proxies, to basically give them a ticket to pollute, because by using carbon markets, they're able to claim carbon neutrality without them having to actually cut down their own emissions, right? And women are nowhere near those conversation rooms. They're pretty much always excluded. And those that actually have a say in shaping climate policy are Western organizations, are corporates. And with increasing financialization of the climate crisis, right? We are seeing climate finance, which is supposed to shield communities from the impacts of the climate crisis in the forms of adaptation, right? A lot of this money is coming in debt form, meaning that we have to go back to pay back to global north countries for a crisis we had the least role in causing, right? And when it comes in debt form, right, it increases our taxes, the cost of living ends up being really high. And this, of course, disproportionately affects women, right? And this means that a crisis where we have to pay back to the causers of it, and we had the least role in causing it, is textbook neocolonialism, right? And on top of that, we are seeing increasing Kenya has, of course, one of the countries with the highest numbers of renewable energy, right? In terms of statistic, is it over 90% of our electricity comes from renewable energy? But a lot of this electricity, right, is in privatized model, right? And so Ruto being platformed as a climate leader, when in reality, a lot of this energy is privatized and not even accessible, and has actually displaced its construction. The wind power plants in North Kenya, in Turkana, have actually displaced communities. The geothermal plants, displacing indigenous communities out of their own lands, and women being disproportionately affected, right? It means that it's not actually justice. And our green dream is actually built on the displacement, the blood of local communities who are not actually benefiting from this infrastructure, right? And that is what Walter Rodney talks about when he talks about what development actually looks like, and how we have very elitist development in Kenya. And on top of that, I think that there are a lot of conversations on feminist climate justice policy, and people are talking about gender mainstreaming, right? But when it comes to gender mainstreaming, I think it's not truly feminist if it's not intersectional feminist, right? And so you hear a lot of gender mainstreaming. What does that actually mean in the first place? You know, I've come to resent that terminology very, very much, where every time I hear it being applied to contexts that actually just leads to maladaptation, that actually just to benefit few women, and not actually triggering structural changes, right? And yeah, is that my 5 minutes?
Yeah, pretty much. I was going to let you go on and on because I'm really resonating with everything, but I think your time is up.
Okay.
Um, it reminded me of a project that I worked on where I was called upon to work on a feminist policy for mining and extractives. And by the end of the project, I was told to change everything into gender mainstreaming. They're like, too radical. We still want to extract from the planet. We still want to destroy. We just want women to also get a chance to destroy the planet. Like, relax. Anyway, as we wrap up, Vivian, you're going to close us off by telling us whether you think that the feminist principles of care and accountability have a role to play in strengthening democratic institutions.
All right, thank you so much, Jahira. Before I answer that, I very quickly wanted to mention two other points from my earlier submission. And the first one was the importance of just defending the feminist spaces that already exist and the feminist spaces that we've already created. And part of that, part of defending those spaces is actually making sure that we also, as feminist organizers, do not weaponize the language of harm and violence against feminist organizers, but also against activists generally, right? Because as fascism rises, as conservatism rises, you would typically see some sense of carceral anger, some sense of punitive ways of organizing that really actually influence whether or not feminist spaces continue to exist. And I don't want to mention these two organizations, but seeing how, bad faith actors who even are within the feminist movements have made sure that these two organizations can no longer do their work, which was actually very niche, right? Very niche and very important feminist organizing, making sure that these organizations and then these spaces no longer exist because of the weaponization of feminist language. That is not to take away from real harm that happens, but to make sure that we actually take steps to build conflict resolution skills. Do you need to take, and also acknowledging that a lot of the conflict within feminist movement spaces are a question of trauma, are a question of burnout, are a question of us not being willing to interrogate and face, the pain that we may carry from our personal lives, from our activist lives, right? So do you need to do a leadership thing, coaching thing? Do you need to do a training or something? Do you need to go to therapy, right? That little step that you take would be truly helpful in making you be easy or be more amenable to navigating conflict within the space. I wanted to mention that. I also wanted to mention that as feminists engage with the state, as we get to the table with the state, I want us to also acknowledge the power that we have as organizers, right? I know a lot of resources already don't move to organizers, but we do have some resources in terms of skill, in terms of finances, in terms of collectivism and people. We have some resources. So when we engage with the state, we can engage and negotiate from a place of power, right? We could say, and I remember this with the End Femicide movement. We had an invitation to meet with one of the departments of I think it was Victims Protection Board, and in that space you could tell that this space that the people in charge just wanted you to ask, what you wanted. If you are going to offer them resources, they were amenable to working with you in this particular manner. And I realized that a lot of the times we really don't ask when we're in policy spaces. In a way, we are thankful, you're grateful to be in those spaces, so that we even forget to actually negotiate from a place of power, from a place of knowing, and position ourselves as knowers of our own lives. I wanted to mention those two things, but also on the question of feminist ethics of care and accountability to strengthen democratic institutions. I wanted to answer that. When you talk about democracy, it is usually we the people, right? It's usually power to the people, with the people, from the people, by the people, right? And a feminist lens of care and accountability actually analyzes or expands the question of people. Who are the people we are talking about? And as Quinta Branson was saying, people be gay sometimes, right? People be Black, people be women, people be immigrants, people be different identities, and we must be able to make sure that democratic institutions actually respond to the vast multiplicities of bodies and identities that exist, right? So that when we talk about we the people, it is not men, it is not white men, right? It is everyone, it is people, right? If you remember the Reject Finance Bill protests, we said categorically as feminists that we are seeing how this protest can have the possibility of being co-opted by men or having a male agenda being forwarded. But we said categorically as women of Kenya, we have a stake in this protest. We pay taxes here, we live here, our lives are here. And so we have a stake in making sure that whatever democratic institutions we build post this protest also respond to our needs as women. I think once we expand how we interrogate or how we interact with people from a feminist care and accountability perspective, then it would also help us to engage with policy then from an expanded version. Because when we are in policy spaces, sometimes when we set the agenda is typically very neutral, right? It's very neutral. It doesn't see the nuances of, what would women need? What would people living in these geographies need? What would people with disabilities need? What would queer folk need? So I guess that would then allow us to expand also how we engage with policymaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivian, and thank you to all the panelists for such an enriching conversation. I'm sure we've all learned a lot from listening to you. I certainly have. And now I'm going to open the floor for a Q&A session. While we wait for people to gear up to ask their questions, there's somebody in the comments is asking how they can reach each of the panelists in their personal capacities. So if you want to get in the comment box and drop your or drop your email address, feel free to do so now. Is there anyone who has a question that they want to ask? I think I'll also read some comments as we wait for questions. No questions? Someone says, Catherine Siokau says, feminism in Kenya is incomplete if it leaves out women with disabilities and trans persons with disabilities. True gender justice means centering their voices, addressing their unique barriers, and ensuring they lead, not get added in later. I like that. Don't get added in later. Joan Cheritich says, economic leverage through community, solidarity kama ya chama, which comes from the people themselves. The amount of progress that can be made through this alone is enormous. Nyambura Gashahi says, how sad is that our fight to live and survive this hellscape is politics to them? Yeah, block that, my goodness. And Jojo goes on to say that representation politics have been biting us in the ass, that we have seen time and time again. We need to re-strategize when it comes to quote unquote queering the ballot. Okay. Nuella Jal says, we need to stop limiting our visions to what the current system allows. We ought to see beyond broken institutions, tribal, ethnic voting, empty promises, and recycled leaders. We deserve it all. I love that. We deserve everything, guys. So let's see what questions we have. Oh, Erica wrote us a comment. I think the challenge with manifestos that politicians run on is that they have the aesthetic of justice. They talk about universal health coverage, affordable healthcare, and so on, but we don't have the political consciousness to debunk this. That is, if I had strong anti-capitalist politics, I would be able to understand financialization to be able to debunk the affordable housing BS. So back to popular political education. Okay, now let's see the questions. Oh, I'm just seeing people's email addresses. I think also they'll have to be shared by Melody after, because it might not be possible for everyone to see. Only Oreos has shown up to everyone, her email address. Everyone else's email address hasn't made it to the main chat section. I'm still hoping for questions though. I don't know if there's hands up that I can't see. If there are no questions, I'll just read the final few comments and then I'll ask the final question to everyone. Oof.
Does it mean, Jaira, we have done a good job if there are no questions?
You've taught so thoroughly that they're even speechless. They're like, what more? What more can be said, truly? I saw some other interesting ones. Yeah, representation politics have been biting us. I read that one. Nuela said, we need to stop limiting our visions to what the current system allows. We have to see beyond broken institutions. I read that one. Sorry, guys. um, Jojo says, we don't need inclusion of women in an inherently patriarchal system. Interesting. And also goes on to say, it's sad how it's a matter of the lesser evil every time it's the electoral time. Alafu tunapigwa na butwaa wakiingia kwa ofisi. Huu unapigwa na butwaa, or you know what to expect, jamani. Nyambura Gashai says, some people use radicality as a tool to get into the systems of oppression as an oppressor and nothing else. Hashtag Kasmal Makur. We can learn something from this too. And Jojo again says, radicality of someone doesn't guarantee their allyship or being an advocate of their followers. Let us not let radical language of a person fool us into believing they have our best interests at heart. We learn daily. Wanjiko Karaoke says, being a feminist, what is in the classism of feminists? The divide amongst ourselves gives the patriarchy strength to use it against us. You know, heterosexual feminists, LBQ feminists, sex workers feminists, and the liberal and radical. And Jojo continues that all the isms find their way into feminist spaces, which baffles Jojo. We need to do better, honestly, as feminists to begin with. That's so true. Nuela says, mass education on the community is very important. LGBTQ plus communities often experience political systems that do not fully reflect their needs or realities. Studying their experiences helps highlight gaps in equality, representation, and access to basic rights, including, where was I? LGBTQ voices in public discussions is important because it broadens our understanding of how policies affect different groups. It also shows how diversity can strengthen institutions by encouraging fairness, transparency, and I keep losing the thing. There's something else that they said. The final comment, fairness, transparency, and I can't see that last word. The final comment, also, what is stopping us from forming our own unregulated meeting spaces, aka churches? I like that question a lot. No tax on them too. We have so many solutions, but we're always thinking in terms of holding and managing power from the top, forgetting the inherent power at the ground. The community is stronger together, regardless of our differences, but we must remember that people are who matter and all be all. Love that. Okay, we have some questions, but not heavy ones. Joy Kiru asks, this is a good question. Do you offer, this is a question to all the panelists, do you offer guidance and mentorship to young upcoming feminists? Anyone can take that up. The one with the mentorship, speak up.
Okay. I could answer that. So at Feminist in Kenya, we don't necessarily have mentorship and guidance per se, but we do have an annual Feminist Institute that runs, that will be running next year from in February 2026. So if you want to apply for that, it's basically just a space for feminists to learn around feminism, but also transformative justice as a way of organizing and as a way of looking at ending gender-based violence. So the applications are on our social media pages. Just check on Instagram, Feminist in Kenya, and you can be able to attend the space.
Thank you. Dark Barbie asks, sorry, somebody else.
Sorry. Yeah, I feel like mentorship is a very personal relationship people have, or like people in that setting can and should have. But for our institution as Galc Plus, we usually have like what we call externships or internships, where people come and sit with us for like 3 to 6 months. To learn firsthand how to do like this work, right? So these are usually running. So you apply as they come, and we pick 2 to 3 people per quarter, depending on how that goes. And you'll come and sit with us at Gulf Plus. You'll be attached to somebody, so you can learn firsthand your area of interest, right? If it's advocacy, if it's comms, if it's whatever it is. But I'm thinking when it comes to mentoring people, that can be a little bit very personal, like a personal relationship you're having with somebody. And on a personal capacity, I do have a couple of those. Yeah.
Dark Barbie asks, how does one participate in querying the ballot without necessarily working for an organization?
I feel like that one is my. Oh, sorry, Erica, please go.
I wanted to answer the previous question, not this
Okay,
one.
sorry, I didn't see your hand up. Go ahead.
I wanted to answer the previous question on the mentorship thing. And I don't know how I feel about mentorship myself. I've never been mentored before or gone through a mentoring process. But one way to learn is through joining an organizing group, because the skills and practices that you need to be able to engage to do for feminist organizing, you get them firsthand when you join a local group, a climate justice group, a women's rights group, a group that organizes against GBV, that kind of thing. I think skills and practices can be gained directly by joining specific groups. And then the other thing of how I get my own politics is just by reading, right? I think there are lots of authors that have been mentioned here that we have drawn from their wisdom and scholarship. I've had Walter, I have had Audre Lorde, I have had name them, right? I think they have really good ideas that could really start twist our feminist thinking, right? I know so many people start from Chimamanda, and then you climb up the climb up the ladder, right? I don't agree with Chimamanda myself. She's a turf. But other than that, yeah, expose yourself to more radical thinkers, and that would also help your organizing, as opposed to being dependent on one person, because you also put somebody on a pedestal, when somebody is your mentor, right? Because what happens when your mentor actually does not align with your politics, or they do something, because your wisdom and your exposure will only be limited to what they know, right? And limits your ability to grow or something like that, as opposed to just throwing yourself in the deep end and exposing yourself to a lot of material.
Go on, Eve, about querying the ballot without joining an organization.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I wanted to mention this earlier, and I'm so glad it's come up, because queering the ballot, the project, is so much more than just getting queer people elected. And I wanted to debunk that, because I feel like that's what's coming off. That's a very small portion of the project, right? Like trying to get queer people who are interested in politics on the ballot. Not that we're not doing it, but that's a very small portion of the project. There's a bigger component of it that's around political education, right? Because we realized last time when shit happened, and we're just looking around and being like, what we have a murderer for president. Like, how did we get here? And a lot of people are just like, I didn't know, right? And when folks were unearthing all of these things that had done, like injustices in the past, people are like, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. So we don't want to be in a situation where queer people are like, I don't know, right? We want to make sure that queer people are making conscious decisions, especially for this next election that is crucial for us as people who are minoritized in this country. So that's what part of the project for querying the ballot will be. Political education that will include civic education, knowledge production and sharing, consciousness raising and awareness, right? So that we know more than just the elections, like a governor, president. We know more than that. We know like our positionality as queer people in this country, how we can organize, come together, and make changes through democracy, right? Like how do we defend our constitution? How do we do these things that we talk about? more broadly, like in a practical way, as a queer person situated in Kakamega, right? So we'll be doing like rounds in the country to make sure that this education is just not centered around like our social media or just like the capital cities. So it's going to be a lot of work. And I'm hoping that all the people who are interested can reach out, right? So you can reach out to either Galk Plus, Nigel Hack, or INEND, and find out where you don't have to be a member, but we are coming to you, and we'll need more quote unquote foot soldiers, right? So we'll need more people on the ground, and I'm sure our contact details have been shared, and you can definitely reach out and be like, I'm from this place and I want to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask my final question to the panel as we wrap up. But before that, Nyambura Gashahi says, if you are interested in a melting pot of women and feminists that we are building, please join us for our mini launch event on Friday, Jamhuri Day, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. And they've put the link in the comment section. Everybody can have a look at it. So as we wrap up, I'm going to start with Oreo, and then I'll pick as we go along. So what stories of collective power from your work illustrate what is possible when communities organize across differences? Give us an anecdote.
So from Meru, we have this organization that has made itself the champion of queer rights, and they have made it they have made it easier for us to like be in spaces and just get the inherent respect that we deserve in spaces. This looks like including us in the projects that they have, speaking about our existence publicly in the space and saying we have different people within the space. Please be very respectful and mindful of them. And this has given us access to spaces where we've learned about our rights, we've built our leadership skills, especially in the sense that Meru is not a region that is really funded, but with that kind of access, we are slowly building our capabilities to get into spaces. We've seen young women get into county spaces and have a voice there because of the capacity building that they've been able to get. We have gotten to understand our contexts better. This is from now the mentorship that has come from the feminists who have been in the leadership and in the movement scene way before us. So in bringing these efforts together, it has seen that the young feminists and young queer people in Meru have had access and representation, even if it doesn't necessarily like come from them. This organization is able to speak on behalf of us. For example, if we have someone right now we have someone who is trying to transition, and leveraging on the networks that this organization has created with the local authorities, they are able to say, here is someone coming for help, please help them. So in bringing all our efforts together has made us a stronger movement on the grassroots, to have conversations, to gain our capacity, to even have a voice in spaces that we wouldn't have a voice in, and to also have something to bring on the table. So this is what these efforts have looked like for us in the rural area, and that is what has worked. Thank you.
Thank you, Oreo. What about you, Rachel? What stories do you have about what can be possible when we work across difference?
One, we underestimate our power. We have the power. I can give an example of when we had floods in Kenya. I think we're the first people who raised the issue. And through that, we managed to bring even the first appointed committee of emergency response to come to Mathare. The same time is the time that we were in the list of government quote unquote as organizations. They usually call ourselves the 416 that were financing protests. And it's through community that saved us a lot of many things that many of you know. Community protection, public protection, community care saved us a lot. And these are things that I don't take it for granted. When community also safeguards the spaces that we have built for resistance, but also as centers of also responding when it comes to crisis, but also center for public participation, where also we saw our community engaging even duty bearers from end to end of response. That's one. I'm also cognizant of time. Secondly is Ukambani. Lower Eastern region in Machakos. We all know I come from those sides, and many of the rural activists, like Oreo, rural activism has been ignored, even community development or government services, and there's devolution. So through that, we managed to push our county government of Machakos, where we are able now to have an hospital built, led by most of us and our people. And at the same time, also having some of our members in the county boards representing the community in this space. And for me, this is a story of changes, because also there's feminist leadership from that level. Through that, we managed to have one of our own who is sitting as the chair of Uwezo Fund in Mathare sub-county. So this, for me, their story, it's possible. When you talk about democracy, it's possible. And it's a lived reality. And the last point is also community protection, even amongst our children in Mathare, where if you are coming to destroy the spaces that they've been used for them to talk for themselves and even prevent some of the violations. These kids have been the forefront, even telling us what is going on in school, are now anti-rights, anti-genders, are trying to brainwash them. So they have been our first intel and also helping us in organizing. Yeah, thanks.
That's lovely. Thank you. Eve, what's your story?
I'll try to make it as short and quickly as possible, but the most recent one that came to my mind the moment you asked this was when we all came together to try and stop the anti-gender and anti-rights conference that happened in Nairobi, right? So the moment we knew that these people were coming to Nairobi, everybody was just like, what can I do to help stop them? And I feel like that for me was the one moment this year when I felt like we really are a movement, right? And we can push together. We had lawyers, we had grassroots, we had queers, we had like people from the sexual reproductive health and rights movement. We had comms people pushing out narratives, like everybody lifting their weight, people with rich and powerful friends calling them, right? We had people talking to like diplomats and politicians and being like, we can't have this conference here. And to me, that was really powerful in terms of bringing us together and just like seeing how like and what we can do when we collectively just be like, we are working together towards a common goal. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Breaking news, Vivian and Erica, you're answering a different question. So I'll go with you first, Vivian. I'll read it as it's been written in the Q&A box. For a united front to be achieved in feminist spaces, what can be done, systemically speaking? I am speaking from the point of view of a person who believes in abolitionist systems. I find that this is easier said than done, which I agree, but has potential for a big difference. So how can we, for a united front to be achieved in these spaces, what can be done?
To answer that as an organizer, I would say that it is really important to see movements, to actually see movements for who they are, what they are, how we organize the everyday realities of movement building, right? A lot of the times, organizing is not sending an email, it's not going to a conference, it could be, right? But a lot of the messy work, the dirty work, the everyday work of organizing gets lost in the little pit holes of reality and of what I call or what others also have called the nonprofit industrial complex and the philanthropic industrial complex, right? You will not see that the everyday, someone in the community reaching out because they have a mental health crisis where they are thinking of, leaving the world, or you will not see someone reaching out because they're in a domestic violence crisis, and you as a frontline feminist organizer you have to be the one to respond to that, right? You will not see the multiple security threats within the community, and you're the first rapid response point of contact for that community member, right? So that gets lost a lot of the times within the spaces. And so it is really important, first of all, if you want to build a united front, we really have to see movements, and we have to not punish them for these realities, right? Because the philanthropic industrial complex, a lot of the times will have rules and systems and regulations that will limit then movements from even accessing funds to do this everyday work. This everyday work is not going to make it in the M&D reports. It's not going to make it in the end of year report, annual report. But it's organizing. It's the real work. And so I think seeing movements is part of building a united front, but also I'm not sure if a united front is truly ever going to be achieved. And I don't think that should necessarily be a goal, right, of having a united front. I think what we can perhaps aspire for is having a unity of politics in a way, right? So that we know that within the feminist movement, yes, you're not only contesting gender, yes, you're not only contesting, class, you're not contesting this and that, but these are the intersectionalities that we are contesting. We may not all agree on strategies, on tactics, on timelines, on context, on political theories and things like that, but we agree that within this feminist movement, this is our boundary when it comes to homophobia, this is our boundary when it comes to violence, this is our boundary when it comes to, who gets to lead which movement, or which feminism gets to be visibilized or validated, right? I truly think that it's trial and error. It's very experimental. It's being intentional and deliberate in our organizing so that we know from our different positionalities and our different contexts, what we must do and what we must not do, but also giving ourselves grace in a way that we do not pedestalize ourselves as activists, because I feel that that's another way of dehumanizing activists, putting us in a place of needing to be 100%, right? Needing to have all the knowledge, all the answers, be the first responders, right? So just making sure that we also don't fall into that trap of superhero activists, but also not the trap of purity politics in a way where we cannot organize with someone just because of a small difference, right? I understand not wanting to organize with someone because of harm they have done, but also creating spaces to repair harm. I think those little intentionalities can be really helpful for the movement. Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's finish with Erica. From an abolitionist perspective, with abolition being this very lofty idea that could have such amazing results, what can we do systemically speaking to achieve the goal?
I think that from an abolitionist perspective, right, a lot of resources are redirected into a failed system, reforming the system or within the system, when the results that we are actually getting from that are very little, right? And not tangible. I think, again, Walter Rodney talking about what really people care about is how it changes my material conditions, right? So that ati sijui UN Women wameweka sijui resolution 246X, women wameincludiwa, or there is a mention of women. How does that affect ule mama wako pale Turkana? Otherwise you've umeweka budget kubwa ya $50,000 wa mama waende New York ama waende Beijing ndo afanye declaration moja, and it is celebrated as a win, but what is the material condition? How has it changed condition ya mama mboga tukiwa kwa hiyo text ati tumewekwa? Those texts oftentimes don't even have teeth. They are not legally binding or anything. That is the one thing. I think a lot of resources are wasted in reformist initiatives, where instead of actually recognizing the neocolonial capitalist nature of the institutions we are actually advocating within and how toothless they are, and actually threaten the system for once, and we can threaten the system. My theory of change, one of them being that from an abolitionist point of view, I think we really, and I've said it so many times here, is that I really think we need to build power through popular political education. Yeah. Otherwise, all of this other things, electoralism, sijui what, gender mainstreaming, sijui nini, pesa mingi inaenda tu huko na hata ifanyi kitu. It doesn't change material conditions. It doesn't actually change material conditions. Yeah.
Na pia ni kizungu mingi.
Very
And I think
technocratic that the average woman cannot even understand in the first place.
Yeah. As we wrap up, I saw a really ironic story this morning where there's a woman in rural South Africa who runs a shebeen, and she had set up her own sort of prison where she locks up men if they fail to pay her. So she locks them up in her shebeen until they're sober, and then they pay her or they go home safely. And I was thinking that's so revolutionary. Like she's reducing drunk driving, she's ensuring that these people don't get caught by cops and be extorted, and then you have to face like how in Kenya, if you're caught on Friday, you have to leave on Monday. I was like so impressed with her. And all she's doing is that she wants to recover the money for the alcohol that she gave you. And the South African police arrested her. So those are the systems that we are working with, reforming and prioritizing over this alternative justice system that this woman has come up with. Yeah, they need to release her. She's that girl. You know, those women who sell traditional liquors or just liquor in general, they always just their brains are ahead. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for participating in this conversation. I think it was really exciting. I hope that the people who showed up really enjoyed it. I'm so grateful to have had this conversation with you. I'm going to hand back to Melody in case she has anything to add.
Hi, thank you so much for that. It was really insightful, and thank you for being a really good moderator with stories, really. I don't have anything else to add, but one thing is this recording, I will try and upload it on our YouTube so that everyone can actually come back maybe and reminisce and go through it again. And those who are not able to reach, they can also go through it. Otherwise, that's it from my side. Otherwise, thank you all for attending, and thank you all for being such good panelists.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
You too. Bye,
Bye bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.